Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode, we're going to drive the Mini. So, stay tuned for that. Now, as I said, on today's episode, we are going to be driving the Mini. We're going to be driving it so far. We're going to drive it from here onto the trailer so that we can head over to the dyno. And we're going to be covering the dyno tune today. Now, for those of you who don't know or haven't been following me on Instagram, I have actually been driving this for the past week and a half or so, getting a closed loop learning and tuning. It does a certain amount of self-tuning to itself if you have the correct engine parameters set up. And so I have been running this around town, driving it in different scenarios at different levels of boost, not really exceeding about 3 or 4 PSI, and really getting an idea of how well the fuel injected setup works. And I have to tell you guys, it works really, really well. It has been an absolute blast to drive. There's only a few little quality of life improvements that I really need, and I want to make sure that the car is safe at boost. Now, in order to do that, that is where a dyno comes in. We need to get the car on a dyno somewhere where it is safe and verifiable so we can test out different levels of boost, different load types, and get somebody who has a little bit more experience tuning these cars, and specifically tuning the Haltech ECU that is on this car. Now, I am going to be towing the Mini down to Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is just a little bit down the road from me, to a shop called Shift Fast Motorsport. They have somebody who is specialized in Haltech tuning that comes in once a month and is going to be working on my car while he is there. Now, it's very exciting stuff. From my knowledge, he doesn't have any experience with Minis, but that's not that uncommon here in the US. Most people don't have access or even any awareness around these Minis, much less a comprehensive understanding of the engine. So it is my job as the person bringing the car to him to equip him with as much information as possible related to the Mini itself. In my case, the key parts are setting up the fuel injected sequential or semi-sequential injector firing, which is very important for the Siamese port robbing issue that these engines tend to have. I need to make sure he understands my displacement, my target PSI, and I am going to be there to assist him while he is tuning this car. Now, my hope is that I'm going to be able to show you guys as much of the tuning process as possible, but I imagine they're going to kind of jump in and start getting to work as well. So fingers crossed, I'll be able to set up a GoPro at least and maybe do some voiceover for you guys. But before we get down there, one thing I did want to mention about the tune, and that is around the Siamese port robbing issue. Now, a wonderful commenter on my last episode posted a really comprehensive comment, and he was explaining about he was the one who actually made some programming changes to the Mega Squirt systems to allow them to properly fire these injectors for a classic Mini. Thankfully, the Haltech ECU already has the capability to do this, but essentially what we're doing, and to compound and add on what we talked about in the last episode, these injectors need to fire at 180 degrees out, alternating. So you have your engine stroke spinning over. Every time 180 degrees, pistons are up and down, up and down. And so the key here is that we want an injector firing every 180 degrees. So we can't fire all of the injectors at once, which would be called multi-point injection, at least with the Haltech setup. What we need is that alternating behavior. So what we did in the ECU software is set it to semi-sequential with 2 iterations per engine cycle with 2 injectors. Now this setup is on the ECU map that I have on my website and available to everybody, but depending on the ECU software that you are using, whether it's Dyno, Mega Squirt, Haltech, whatever it ends up being, you need to make sure that you can match that kind of behavior. Every 180 degrees, alternate between the 2 injectors. So 180, fire, 180, fire, 180, fire, 180, fire. In that orientation, and you're going to be in good shape. Now, when checking your plugs, you're going to see that the behavior is a little bit different than a carbureted engine. Now, the Minis are always richer in the 2 center cylinders and leaner on the outer cylinders. And so this is also the case with the individual throttle body that we have set up here, but you will still see that same behavior. The center spark plug's a little bit richer and the outer spark plug's a little bit leaner. The only way to truly fix this is to have a cross-flow head and truly separate the ports going into each intake. But for most of us, that's not something that we want to do. So this is the best way and the best of both worlds, I guess you could call it, to get this setup working properly. Now, the only other caveat that we have to tell our tuner or anyone who is going to be using these cars on the dyno is that these cars tend to need to be a little bit richer in all of their scenarios because of that port robbing issue. So that is especially true in boost. The higher boost levels need more fuel than you would probably see in a similar car with a separated throttle body or with inlet ports that are separated. It's just kind of the facts of the game, and you'll likely see in my ignition map as well, in my ECU map, the target AFRs in the boost range are much higher, or rather, the numbers are much lower to target a higher quantity of fuel to make sure that the engine stays safe and that you don't end up, exploding your engine. So anyways, let's get this car out of the garage onto the trailer and head down to South Carolina. All right, so now while we're getting the car up on the dyno, let's talk about what's going to be happening here. We're going to be running the car at about 15 PSI to start off, and then finding a happy tune around 13 to 12 PSI for right now. We're going to keep things safe, and we don't want to avoid causing any sort of undue damage to the car. Now, the EFI tuner here that we're working with at Shift Fast Motorsports allows me to actually get in and kind of work with him to find the happiest tune for this car. He knows that I have worked on these cars, I know a lot about them, so it was really cool to be able to kind of work hand in hand with him. So for this next part here, I'm just going to let you guys watch the raw video of the power poles. These are the power poles where I got my peak power. That's at 15 PSI, and I am super impressed. I'm going to show you guys the numbers at the end of the video, at least the end of this next segment, and you guys can see what power figures we actually pulled out of this car. All right, and so now we're back in the garage. That dyno session was the craziest, the most exciting that I have ever done with this car. I'm over the moon. I cannot believe that we broke 200 horsepower on this little A-series engine that's in here. But there has been a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of meticulous learning that has gone into making sure that this works the way it's supposed to, and it's extremely performant. Everything from the pistons to the gearbox to everything has been built specifically for reliable power. Now, those of you who follow me on Facebook, Instagram, you've probably seen me mention this a couple of times, but I am going to be making this turbo map and base maps available to everybody. Now, I am going to be porting my Haltech ECU map, the Nexus map that I have, to Speeduino, Megasquirt, and of course Haltech as a base maps. And I'm going to be making this available in two ways. The first, of course, is going to be on my merch store. If you guys want to help support the channel, help support the thousands of hours that have gone into making this a reality, you can purchase these maps directly on the store, and when you buy those, there's no shipping, nothing like that. It immediately gets sent to your inbox and you can download those and start modifying them for your car. Now, additionally, I am going to be making this available to anyone for free. Now, this might seem counterintuitive considering I just said it's available on my store, but my goal with this is to not make fuel injection and this kind of work on your car completely cost prohibitive. I want everything to be as accessible to as many people as possible. And if you guys feel like you find value in the ECU map, which is not cheap, this is a lot of money to get something like this done. If you find value in that and you want to help support the channel and support that time, you can purchase that map straight on my store. But if you can't do that, maybe your budget doesn't allow for it, I do want to make this available to you guys as well. So a lot of people have called me crazy for doing that, but this is the way Classic Mini DIY is. This is the whole purpose of this channel. It's to make this information available to everybody. So to recap, there will be the exact map that I have on my car with all of my configurations for sensors and like boost controllers and all of these different things. Those are all going to be in my Bad Wolf map that's going to become part of this. I am going to port that over to a base map for Haltech that is only going to include the bare minimum values that you might need to kind of get started on an EFI journey. And then I'm going to port those base values over into Speeduino, Megasquirt, and if you guys have other ECUs that you'd like me to put those into, please suggest them in the comments below, and maybe you can help me get that set up depending on the ECU software. Now, you might be wondering what is next for this car and what's next for Classic Mini DIY. And in short, I don't have an answer for you guys just yet, but in terms of this car and things I want to do to this car, everything else is more broad and bigger strokes that I am not going to be working on for quite a few years. My goal is to refine this even further, potentially add a few nice to have items with the EFI setup, such as an electronic boost controller, drive-by-wire, all of these different things I want to explore in the future. But largely the car is done, it's ready to be driven, and it's a dream to drive. So if there is something that you guys would like to see me do on the channel, maybe something in the future, let me know in the comments as well. Now, one other thing I want to cover about the car since the dyno tune, I've received this question quite a bit, and people see that 204 horsepower figure and they're like, oh my God, the car must be absolutely miserable to drive on the road. How do you even street it? You know, this must be only a track car. And that's what's cool about two things. One is the turbo application in general. If you don't put a lot of load on the engine, you are not going to get a lot of power back out of it at that time. So what that means is that if you're driving in stop and go traffic and you just kind of modulate the throttle and just, you know, ease into it, you're not going to get straight into 15 PSI of boost. Boost has to build up, and you need load on the engine in order to build that boost. So the car can be driven perfectly normally on the street, and it's totally normal. In fact, it's not that much different than driving a regular Mini. But the key here is that once you want a little bit of power, you put your foot into it, you put your foot down, and you start generating that boost pretty quickly, and you get that raw, unbridled power that comes with a turbo and one running at 15 PSI. Now, this engine can probably tolerate a little bit more boost, but my goal with this was reliable power, and so having 204 horsepower of reliable power is amazing. So for the most part, that's where I'm going to stop this off, and I'm going to kind of cap it right there. I don't want to blow up this engine, and I want it to be reliable in the future. The other piece I just mentioned was a boost controller. That's something that I can use to modulate the boost artificially. Right now, boost is generated by the wastegate pressure, and I have a small little adjuster in that wastegate circuit that allows me to turn the boost up. It's manual. You have to open up the hood, adjust it that way. A simple boost controller can be added in that circuit. It's a boost controller solenoid, and that gets wired to the ECU. And then it allows your ECU to modulate that boost. So what that means is you can actually configure in your ECU for the engine to not just slam the boost in. So you can save things like your drop gears and prevent them from dying prematurely. So even if you put your foot down, you put it pedal to the metal, the boost controller is going to prevent it from just immediately generating all that boost, and then you have an even more streetable car with a simple little controller. That's going to wrap up this episode. It was a short one. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. It was really fun for me to work on this project, but also to get it on the dyno. A huge thank you to Shift Fast Motorsports down in South Carolina. You guys made this possible, made that power figure possible. But that is going to wrap up this episode. And don't forget, if you want to help support the channel, please head over and purchase that ignition map. It helps out the channel and me, obviously, but it also helps me build and create big projects that I can share this information to you guys at little to no cost. But a huge thank you for tuning in, and until I see you guys on the next one, you know the drill. Enjoy those minis and motor on. See you later.